We're being asked to solve three different quadratic equations. We're going to do this using a two-step method, which involves the discriminant of a quadratic. And here's just a quick reminder: the discriminant, which we write capital delta, is always equal to b squared minus 4ac. And that's referring to the generic quadratic equation which I'm writing here. Plus c equals to 0. Okay, now, if we look at this first one, a, we have 2x squared plus 8x plus 8 equals to 0. The first thing we do is calculate the discriminant delta. So delta is equal to b squared minus 4ac. And in this instance, b is 8, so that's going to be 8 squared, minus 4 times a is 2, so 4 times 2, times c, which is 8. And this will lead us to 64 minus 8 times 8, which leads us to 64 minus 64, and finally we can see that delta is equal to 0. When this happens, it means that the quadratic equation only has one solution. And that solution, I'm writing here, is always going to be equal to negative b divided by 2 times a. That's the formula. So, in this instance, we saw that b was 8, so I'll have x equals to negative 8 over 2 times a. So, since a is 2, that turns into 2 times 2. This leads us to negative 8 over 4, and finally we can see that x is equal to negative 2. And we're done. So remember, the formula that we have here is only used if delta is equal to 0. We now move on to the second equation. We had this, b. And the equation was 2x squared minus 8x minus 10 is equal to 0. So again, the first thing I do is calculate delta. Delta is equal to b squared minus 4ac. And what I'm going to do here, just to avoid making sign errors, because I can see there are negatives in the equation, and that's a sign error is sort of lurking around there. So what I'll do is the following. I'm going to, just looking at my equation, I can see that a is 2, b is negative 8, and c is negative 10. You don't have to do this, it's just a good idea because you'll avoid sign errors this way. So back to delta. Delta is equal to b squared minus 4ac, and so in this case b squared is negative 8 in parentheses squared. Be careful to put the parentheses when you square that number, otherwise again you may make a sign error. So that's negative 8 squared minus 4 times 2 times negative 10. This leads us to 64 minus 8 times negative 10, which leads us to 64 minus negative 80. That in turn becomes 64 plus 80. Remember, when we subtract a negative, it is the same thing as adding. And finally, we can see that delta is equal to 144. Now, in this case, we've met the condition where delta is positive. This means that our quadratic equation will have two solutions. Those two solutions are given by the formula x1 is equal to negative b minus the square root of delta over 2a, and the second solution will be x2 is equal to negative b plus the square root of delta over 2a. So, plugging these different values into our two formula for our solutions, we'll find for the first solution, x1, we have negative b. So remember, b was negative 8. So that becomes negative 8. Minus the square root of delta. Delta, remember, was 144. All of that over 2a. And a was 2, so that's 2 times 2. This will lead us to, well, negative 8 turns into positive 8, so that's just 8 minus square root of 144 is 12. So 8 minus 12 over 4. This then leads us to x1 is equal to negative 4 over 4, which is equal to negative 1. So we have one solution. The second solution, x2, will be exactly the same thing with the exception that there will be a plus before the square root. So I can go right ahead and say that this is negative 8 plus the square root of 144 over 2 times 2. This in turn becomes positive 8, so that's 8 plus square root of 144, remember, was 12, over 4. That turns into 20 over 4. And finally, our second solution, x2, is 5. So this quadratic equation has two solutions. We had x1 is equal to negative 1, and x2 is equal to 5. We now turn to the final equation. We had c, and that was 3x squared minus 6x plus 7 is equal to 0. So again, we start by calculating delta. Delta is equal to b squared minus 4ac. And once more, I can see that there are negatives inside this quadratic, so I'm going to go ahead and look at all the coefficients. I can see that a is equal to 3, b is equal to negative 6, and last but not least, c is equal to 7. Now, going back to delta, b squared will be equal to negative 6 in parentheses squared minus 4 times 3 times 7. That will lead us to 36 minus 12 times 7, which leads us to 36 minus 84. 36 minus 84 then becomes negative 48. So delta is negative 48. Now in this case, we can see that delta is negative. And when this happens, there are quite simply no solutions. So remember, if delta is negative, there are no solutions. No solutions. If delta is equal to 0, there is one solution, and that's given by x is equal to negative b over 2a. And last but not least, if delta is positive, there are two solutions, and the formula for these solutions are x1 equals to negative b minus the square root of delta over 2a, and x2 is equal to negative b plus the square root of delta over 2a. And there we go.